Now, I've made a few changes to the draft that I showed in my last video, and I'm going to go through them in this video. Right, we'll start off by talking about goalkeepers and defenders, and the first thing I wanted to focus on was just who is going to be my goalkeeper. Now, I'm pretty settled on the fact that I want a 4.5 million keeper, and there have always been three options that have been floating around. But there's some news from Fabrizio Romano that Chelsea have signed a new goalkeeper in Jurgensen from Villarreal. So they've got Sanchez, Petrovic, and Jurgensen now in their team. Who is going to start? I've never experienced a team with three potential first choice goalkeepers. Enzo Maresca has said that Sanchez should be his first choice keeper, but he's just signed a new one. So, what does this mean? I don't think Sanchez is nailed on to start, and I wouldn't trust him enough to pick him anymore. He was my goalkeeper in my previous team, but I think you have to look elsewhere now if you have him. They've signed a new goalkeeper. That means, obviously he's not rated, which is it just seems mad to me. Anyway, Dean Henderson is the other option. If he is nailed on for Crystal Palace, I really do like him. And obviously Sam Johnson as well. But who is going to start out of Dean Henderson and Sam Johnson, I still think is kind of anyone's guess. I don't know. I don't think anyone can be sure of who that first choice Crystal Palace goalkeeper is. Which leaves one more option in my opinion. Now, he doesn't look as glamorous when it comes to getting saves, but the amount of expected goals conceded that Nottingham Forest accumulated, particularly under Nuno, was in the top 6 in the entire Premier League, right? They were really solid defensively. Looking at these three keepers, for example, he makes a fair few left saves, but his expected goals conceded are also a lot lower, basically more than 3 lower than all of the other goalkeepers on this list. So I think Sells at the moment is the best 4.5 million keeper. Okay, now in my previous draft, I had Trent Alexander-Arnold, and I'm not going to say that I've gone off him completely. Trent is a great option in this game, but I was a bit strapped for cash with some of the changes that I wanted to make. Andy Robertson at 6 million, right? He put up better expected returns per 90 last season than Trent did. Trent was on 0.36 and Robertson got 0.39. I know that's a tiny little minute difference, but ultimately, when it comes to saving 1 million, for a player that last season put up very similar attacking stats, I think you can make really good justification for Robertson being in your team. Now, one thing to bear in mind, right? I'm very aware that he's currently injured, so he's due to come back from injury at the end of Liverpool's pre-season tour, and I imagine they'll have some friendlies before the season actually starts. So that is a little bit of risk to bear in mind. Liverpool have the best opening 5 fixtures of any team in the league. First 3 are Ipswich, Brentford, and then Man United away might be quite tough, but you'll see with my bench defenders, right? I'd be quite happy to start any of my bench defenders over Robertson, potentially for that game if I don't fancy him. But, with those attacking numbers that he put up last season, who's to say he couldn't do something against Man United, right? And for 1 million less than Trent, with the numbers they both put up last season, I think you could make the drop to Robertson, and that's what I'm planning to do at the moment. Now, I've got to say, I've been finding it really hard to ignore the Arsenal defence. They were by far, in a way, the best defence in the league last season. 29 goals conceded from 38 games, and they kept 18 clean sheets, right? That's basically a clean sheet in half the games that they played. They conceded, fewest goals in the season of any team in the league. And I would say the 4 players you can see on my screen at the moment are nailed on, right? I've already spoken about my goalkeeper. I don't think I'm going to go for David Raya in goal, which leaves Gabriel, Saliba, and Ben White. Ben White at 6.5 million. I know he was the top scoring defender in the game last year, but ultimately, I don't think he offers that much more than Gabriel and Saliba. So I don't think I'm going to go for Ben White. Between Gabriel and Saliba, I would say Gabriel has the higher upside because he's probably more dangerous in the opposition box from set pieces, and I would probably back him to get more attacking returns than Saliba will. However, I do think Saliba is just that little bit more nailed on in that team than Gabriel, particularly considering, they've got Timber, Calafiori waiting in the wings to play. One of those guys at some point, maybe when the Champions League kicks off, could start getting in the starting 11 in the Premier League. So right now, I'm going to go for Gabriel because I think his points potential is just that little bit better than Saliba. But between the two of them, there is really very little in it. All right, and then finally, it's really hard to pick in my mind who are the best 4.5 million defenders. There are so many good options in FPL this season. It's really hard to choose. Ultimately, I think maybe Dan Burn is the only omission here, just because I'm not 100% sure he plays every game, despite his stats being really good. All of these players could go in my team and do just fine. At the moment, my favourites, I'd say Konsa, Anderson. I like Crystal Palace, and I think Anderson is probably the stronger of all of those Crystal Palace defenders there. Mikalenko, Martinez. I really like Robinson and 8 as well. So yeah, those would be my picks of players at that price point. All right, here is how we're going to line up for Game Week 1 at the moment then. Sells in goal, Gabriel, Martinez and Robertson. I think Man United are going to be greatly improved this season on last. Unfortunately, Lenny Yoro, their new centre-back signing, limped off after their pre-season friendly against Arsenal with what looked like a sprained ankle. How long is he going to be out for? Will he be ready for the start of the season? All those questions are up in the air at the moment. But I still think Man United are going to be improved upon where they were last season. Fulham at home, I would suggest, is a decent fixture to open things up with. And the one thing I'd say about Fulham is without Palhinha, I'd really question how good of a team they're going to be. João Palhinha was so important to Fulham. He basically propelled them from being, in my mind, I don't mean this as an offence to Fulham fans or anything, but in my mind, he propelled them from like a borderline relegation team to mid-table, comfortably staying in the Premier League, right? With him gone, it's going to be really hard to replace him. I don't think you can replace him. He is, in my mind, one of the best centre defensive midfielders in the league. Basically, what I'm trying to say is I think Fulham will be, you know, towards the bottom end, maybe even fighting for relegation this season. So Fulham at home is a good fixture to kick things off for Martinez. And obviously, I already spoke about Robertson. I'm preferring him to Trent at the moment just to save the million. I like Gabriel as the strongest Arsenal defender. You know, I think these three defenders could get off to a good start. Right, couple of bits of data I wanted to look at for midfielders. I really like the 7 million midfielder price point, and there are three players in particular that I really like. Eze and Mbeumo and Rashford in particular. Rashford, not actually got him in my team at the moment, I'll give that away. But I think he could have, obviously, a much better season than what he put up last year. Right? Only 10 attacking returns from 26 starts. Like I said, I think Man United will improve next season. I just believe they will. And Rashford, I think he'll improve too. You know, him being left out of the Euros, I just think he's going to have a good season. Or at least go back to the levels that we expect Rashford to be playing at, right? Which in my mind, if he does play to the level of a couple of seasons ago, 7 million is going to be an absolute bargain for him. And the opening fixtures, Fulham and Brighton, he's got a historically really good record against. Fulham, I think he could do well against. That's a good couple of opening fixtures. But for me with Rashford, just because of his drop-off in form last season, I'd want to see, you know, 3 or 4 games of him looking really, really good to convince me to put him back in my team. So for me, he's probably on the watch list for those first 3. If he plays well, he could well get into my team. Eze, I think, is one of the best midfielders in FPL. I think most videos you've watched of people building FPL teams probably got Eze in them, right? With Elise going, he's going to become that Crystal Palace talisman on penalties, free kicks, put up really, really strong numbers last season, as you can see there. Couple of little bits of doubt around him. Number one is he's linked to Tottenham at the moment. I don't really think Palace can afford to sell him. I think they have to hang on to him no matter what this season, because if Elise and him leave, I think they're in real trouble. So I think they're going to have to keep hold of him. So I'm not too worried about that. The other thing I am a little bit worried about is the fact he picked up a few hamstring injuries last season. And hamstrings are one of those body parts that once they go once, they're weakened and they continue to go. So that's a little bit of risk, I would say, for Eze. Other player I really like, and it's kind of going on a hunch that I think Tony's going to leave Brentford. I think everything, to be honest, last season, he was setting himself up for a move pretty much, wasn't he? I think he's going to be off. We all know how good Mbeumo was. If you played FPL last season, you'll know how good Mbeumo was at the start of last season. He becomes Brentford's talisman when there's no Tony. So he takes the pens, the free kicks, you name it. You know, like I said, Brentford talisman, right? 9 goals, 7 assists. That's 16 attacking returns for the 22 starts he made last season. And 0.71 expected returns per 90. You know, that's the best underlying numbers, expected returns per 90 wise, of any midfielder 7 million and below. That goes to Mbeumo for last season. So yeah, Those three guys I think are great options. I'd probably start though with Eze and Mbeumo. Now there's room in my team as well for a 6.5 million mid. I'm not going to spend too long going through this comparison. I have already in my best midfielders in the game at every price point video. You can check that out on my channel. But the 6.5 million midfielder spot in the game I think is worth having a player from, right? And what I thought I'd do is just put a graphic together to compare them all to help you pick who you think is best. For me on this list, there are three that I really like the look of. Leon Bailey, I like Nkunku, and I like Gibbs White. Gibbs White, Nottingham Forest have the best opening three fixtures of any team in the Premier League. He's likely the penalty taker, I believe. Put up some fairly decent numbers for Forest last season. Not one of the best, sort of mid-table on this list. But you really look to the quality of those fixtures for Gibbs White. Nkunku, he's got Man City at home first up, which of course is not the best fixture. But then, you know, Man City conceded a fair few goals last season. They certainly weren't the best defence in the league. So yes, on paper, that could be a tough game, but, you know, Nkunku could well score in that. Made a fair few bench appearances, but from his 2 starts, he scored 3 goals. You can see there it's close between him and Bailey, who I'd suggest is obviously another pickable option. But he is top of all the 6.5 million players for expected returns per 90. And obviously, based on those stats, you have to consider Leon Bailey as well, right? 21 attacking returns from 22 starts in the Premier League, massively outperformed his XG, etc. But I think he's a really good option too. 0.58 expected returns per 90. West Ham away first up. Arsenal at home mixed in. That's obviously tough. And then Leicester away game week 3. I think that's a really good set of 3 fixtures. So this 6.5 million midfielder spot has been sort of up in the air in my mind. I've had each of Bailey and Nkunku and Gibbs White in my team. But right now, I've gone for Nkunku. So Nkunku and Mbeumo, Eze. And then of course, I didn't even need to make a segment on him, I didn't think. Mo Salah is in as my captain. I think Salah is going to be not only the most popular captain, but probably the optimal in terms of, you know, expected points, expected, you know, you name it. He's going to be top of the projections for Game Week 1, in my opinion. So he's in as my captain. I didn't do a feature on him because, well, I think most people are going to have Salah for Game Week 1, and I think he's the best captain. So, yeah, that's my midfield. Up front then, I wanted to pick probably 2 of these premium forwards. Now, Haaland, Watkins and Isak, I think, are just absolutely outstanding in this game, right? They come in at, well, certainly Watkins and Isak at least come in at decent value. Haaland, he's the most expensive player in FPL history, but the thing I would say about Haaland, and I've always kept this opinion, at the start of the season at least, before, you know, the good differentials, the good cheap players, etc. emerge, I think you're best playing it safe and picking him, purely because in game weeks 2 and 3, he's the best captain. And if you don't have him for that Ipswich at home fixture in game week 2, I think you could be missing out on just an absolute mega haul. He had what people would consider to be a disappointing season last year, and he was still the top scorer in the Premier League, and he scored 27 goals. He scored 2.5 fewer goals than he actually accumulated in XG, and he was one of 2 players in the league to be expected to get more than 1 return per 90 minutes. So that means every time he stepped out on a football pitch, he was expected to get more than 1 return. So there's only 2 players at that level. That's Salah and Haaland. And I think have Salah in your team, captain in game week 1 when Haaland's got Chelsea away. But then that Ipswich at home fixture for Haaland is too good to ignore in my opinion. And with this new 5 transfer rule they brought into FPL, you really want to get off to a solid start, because what could happen is if you go different and you don't have Haaland, you don't have Salah, you'll probably have to use multiple transfers to bring them into your team, whereas other people will be able, if they've got them, they're not going to be in a rush to make transfers. And if you have a good start, you could probably go 3 or 4 weeks without actually making a transfer. And then in that time, you basically have a wild card after, you know, 4 or 5 transfers to make changes to your team and pull even further away. That's how this transfers rule could work. So for me, it sounds a little bit boring, but getting off to a good, steady, strong start, I think is the way to go. And then that leaves a question, who else at this price point do I go for? Watkins, Isak and Havertz. To be honest, I'm going to rule out Havertz straight away. I don't think his numbers are of anywhere near the level of Watkins and Isak. And I'd also question, yes, he probably starts the season as Arsenal's number 9, but his kind of versatility really holds him back in FPL in my opinion, because they got Gabriel Jesus who can play at the 9. I'm pretty sure Trossard played a bit of time there last season, and Havertz can move into the midfield. So for me, I just don't like Kai Havertz. And then it's between Watkins and Isak. A really difficult comparison on paper to make in my opinion. But when you look at the underlying numbers, right, Watkins got 18 assists from 4 expected assists, right? A lot of these players outperform their expected assist data, right? But Watkins, he's an extreme example. Do you really think he's going to get 18 assists this season? I don't think he's going to quite get that. He probably gets in and around 10 maybe, but that's like half the amount that he got last season. Whereas Isak, he scored more goals from 10 fewer starts and his XG was way more. So for me, looking at those stats and the fact, you know, we don't know if Watkins is the penalty taker with Douglas Luiz leaving yet, but Isak is definitely the penalty taker for Newcastle. He ticks that box. And I would say the opening 3 fixtures for Newcastle are probably just that little bit better than Villa, particularly considering Villa have Arsenal at home in game week 2, right? So the comparison for me between Watkins and Isak has Isak coming out on top. All right then, here's my front 3, Haaland, Isak, and I've gone for João Pedro as well. I'll just talk about João Pedro very quickly. So he's a little bit of a risk, I'll admit. He wasn't the most nailed player in De Zerbi's team, but I've got a feeling that the new Brighton manager considers João Pedro his talisman. He's currently obviously the penalty taker for Brighton. And when you look at those expected returns per 90 stats for João Pedro, Adam Armstrong is available at this price point as well, but bear in mind those stats are for him in the Championship last season, right? I'm focused on João Pedro at the moment, but I would consider Armstrong as another option. He's probably a little bit safer to start, but he's obviously probably going to score a fair few fewer goals. But João Pedro last season put up 0.74 expected returns per 90, right? And you compare that to the premium forwards, Watkins, 0.58. So, you know, João Pedro, he's a better option than Watkins according to the expected returns per 90 stat. That's not obviously not the full story, etc. But I think he's really good at 5.5 million. The only thing about João Pedro and Brighton is those opening fixtures. Everton away, who kept, I believe, 13 clean sheets last season. And obviously at Goodison Park are going to be stronger. Man United at home, who I've just said will be greatly improved. And then Arsenal away in those first 3. So 3 pretty horrid fixtures, to be honest. But I still think he's got a chance. So he's in my team at the moment. On the bench, I've gone for basically, this is a kind of a structure of a team I suggest most people follow, really. A 3-4-3 with a 4 million goalkeeper, a 4 million defender, a 4.5 million defender, and a 4.5 million midfielder. And I think I'm locked on those 3 sort of outfield players. Barco, I've got in my mind as the best Brighton 4 million defender because, well, not Brighton, the best Premier League 4 million defender to start with. With Estupinian being injured, I think Barco is going to be starting at left back. And I think comparing him to other 4 million defenders who are basically all promoted players, you may as well just go for Barco, in my opinion, and back Brighton to do a bit better than the promoted teams. Konsa, like I said, there are plenty of 4.5 million defensive options out there. I've just preferred Konsa at the moment. And then Harry Winks, I think he'll play every game for Leicester. And he's not quite a defensive midfielder. He's a little bit more attacking than someone like Chowdhury, for example. And I think he's probably the best 4.5 in the game. Finally then, we're going to put this team through the Fantasy Football Hub AI team rating, and it comes out at 93%, projected to get 66 points in Game Week 1. If you want to use this AI team rating tool yourself, see the 3-week projected points for all of the players in your team, I think this is really useful, to be honest. It's probably the best tool I've seen when it comes to building a team at the moment. Fantasy Football Hub, you can sign up. I've got 50% off with the link in the description. If you want to use this tool to rate your own team, feel free to. There's a link in the description, like I said, to get 50% off. Fantasy Football Hub, like I said, rates it at 93%. So yeah, I think this is a pretty solid team. And when you look at their optimal AI team, it actually has Robertson in defence as well instead of Trent. I think this might be one of the more controversial things I've done with this team in picking Robertson. But Fantasy Football Hub AI really seems to like it. So yeah, that's my team. All right, I hope you enjoyed that video. Like I said, a little bit of an update, couple changes here and there to my team based on stuff that's happened in recent days and weeks. If you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave me a like rating. Let me know in the comments. You know, I've put a lot of opinions out there in terms of players in my team, etc. If you disagree with any of my opinions, I'm not afraid to hear it in the comments. Just be polite about it is all I ask. Yeah, let me know what you think of the team. If you want to see more content from me, I'll obviously have pretty much daily FPL content coming out before the start of the season. You can subscribe to the Golden Goal channel, which should be just there on your screen. I thank you very much for watching, and I will catch you in my next video.